the 90s. What a great decade for games. And what did I play mostly back then? Well, point and click adventures was my favorite genre. So why not talk about my favorite games from back then in order of greatness? And as a short disclaimer, these are my personal favorites. I know objectively that some games up there are maybe not as good, but it's just how I remember them and what I love to play back then. And as a side note, I condense adventure series into a single title that I like most, because otherwise this video would just go on forever. Really Beamish is not part of this list, unfortunately. It's just an honorable mention. So without further ado, let's start with place 25.
My God! Help me!
This is Shadow of the Comet, a game that looks great, has a really great atmosphere, unfortunately doesn't play that well and has a very frustrating ending, at least in my book. So it's your typical 90s point and click adventure, you could say. And yeah, I really love this one because I'm a big Lovecraft fan and I really like the cheesy, cringy atmosphere of the game in all the locations and stuff. But the puzzles are a bit weird, the controls are a bit weird, and at the end it gets quite tedious and you can die a lot, which is not that great, but it has still a very fun place in my heart, and I like to revisit it from time to time, even if it's just for the graphics and the atmosphere.
Dr. Cobble tells me you're interested in stars.
I'm lucky I made it out of Egypt.
What did they want?
Not my autograph, I'll wager.
I'm glad you escaped. Life would be boring without you.
We both take pleasure where we find it, May. That's why we're so well suited to each other.
Yes, and New York is only a few hours away.
The Riddle of Master Lu. Man, I want to love this game. It has all the FMV cringe and all the great characters that you would love to have in such an adventure game. But it also has a lot of problems, unfortunately. The game is non-linear and there are several ways that you can end up in dead ends, and even without noticing it. And there are a lot of logic puzzles, and well, generally I'm not much of a fan of logic puzzles anyway, but there are some that are really frustrating, at least in my book. But I still really like this game. It has some great locations, some very funny characters, and how could you not love the mixture of the pre-rendered backgrounds with the FMV on top?
Someone's after the Emperor's seal.
Ah, what a sad business. A delicate child snatched from his home by a demon.
Gobliins 2. What a quirky nice little game. I just recently did a review on Woodruff and the Snibble of Azimuth, so I was hesitant if I should put that on this place, but even if it's probably the better game, I just felt more nostalgic for the original Goblins, and I still remember how I played that game on the Amiga of a friend. And we had great time figuring out what you're supposed to do. Which is not that easy sometimes, because it's not only your typical point and click adventure. There are some very interesting and unique things about this, how the puzzles are structured. For example, sometimes you really have to get the timing correct. It's not only about doing the right things, but doing them at the right time. And you have the different characters, the two that you switch between, which have different abilities, and you have to think about that as well. Nice little game. Some puzzles are a bit strange, but I really like the style and the humor.
Dear sir, you look powerful.
Teen Agent might be a bit of an oddball here, because it's not from one of the big adventure houses, it's from a Polish developer, and even though it doesn't show off the AAA quality that you get from many of the games from this list, it's still very dear to my heart. I especially remember playing the shareware version, where you only had to solve the first part of the game, and I did that over and over again. And in my youth, I really liked the humor. If I'm looking at it today, it's quite cringy, but yeah, what can I say? I was a bit younger then and I thought it was hilarious. And I also liked that you were playing a teenager, which, well, I was a teenager myself, so I could identify with the character. And yes, it's a nice little game. It's actually quite playable even today. The puzzles are not too hard and there are no dead ends, so it's really a nice time.
Now, with your help, we can finally hear Malcom's side of the story.
Legend of Kyrandia, a great adventure series by Westwood Studios, the maker of Command & Conquer and Lands of Lore. But why did I pick the third part? Well, it was the only part I owned. It's as simple as that. So I didn't play the second part, and I know many people say it's way better, but yeah, I played the third one and I still liked it. Especially because you are able to play the bad guy here, and that was something pretty new to me, and you can actually lie to other characters on purpose, which sometimes is quite funny. The graphics didn't age that well, unfortunately. Back then this 3D rendered stuff looked really cool, but today I wish they had kept the pixel art from the second game. But nevertheless, I think it's a cool game. The puzzles are sometimes a bit crazy, but it's still very unique. Okay, now I think it's time to admit that I'm not the biggest King's Quest fan. It's not the games, it's just me. I never really got into all that medieval fantasy setting. That just was my cup of tea back then, and not much better today, I would say. Still, I felt I had to place the game somewhere on my top 20. I mean, these games are cool, and the one game of the long series that I actually played for a while was King's Quest VII, and I really enjoyed it back then because the art style was more like a Disney cartoon, which was quite new and looked quite spectacular during that time. And I also found it interesting that you were not playing that guy from the other games, but you were actually playing a female character, and I thought that was kind of interesting. So it's a really cool game, but not higher on my list. I'm sorry.
Have you learned to speak English yet? I don't speak pygmy. Goodbye.
Flight of the Amazon Queen was a game that I completely missed back then. I've seen a few ads in gaming magazines and I always was curious, but I guess I just didn't have the money or something. Fortunately, I corrected that mistake last year and played through the whole thing, and it's a really cool game. I definitely like the Indiana Jones vibe and the humor, and also the music is great, and also the puzzles are quite entertaining. It has really this tropical holiday vibe going on, which is awesome. The reason why it's not higher on the list is because of the third act, which is quite tedious. I didn't enjoy that at all. There were so many locations. You are like in some kind of labyrinth and you have to do crazy stuff to get out of there. It really feels very disjointed to the rest of the game. So for what it is, the first two parts are really great and the last one kind of sucks.
Born in old St. Louis, by the age of 4, Dad knew he was the best little crack shot the West had ever seen. By the time he reached pubescence, he could outshoot all the adolescents west of Durango and north of Abilene. Pharkas, Freddy Pharkas.
One of the lesser known I love games is Freddy Pharkas, and it's a really cool one actually. I really enjoyed the mix of a Wild West setting with comedy. The characters are funny, the location is everything that you would expect from a Wild West town, and it looks really cool as well. The graphic style is quite unique in my opinion. It has this caricature art style and a lot of bright colors. The puzzles are okay, a bit hit and miss, and it's quite tedious that you have to do the pharmacy day job where you have to mix all the different pills, medicine and recipes, which I think was kind of a copy protection. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, it's fun the first time, but it becomes a bit tedious afterwards. But that's not a big issue. Great game, and I think it's been overlooked by many people. The Police Quest series gained the reputation to be less of a point-and-click adventure and almost more like a job simulator. You have to follow protocol very neatly, and it's not so much about having puzzles but more about busy work and to know what you should do as a police officer. That is a big criticism that many people have for the series, but actually I personally don't mind that much, because to me that's very immersive and I really like to roleplay as a police officer, kind of. There are two reasons why I picked the fourth entry in the series. The first is that it wasn't that hard. I had problems with the older Police Quest games where you could also die a lot, but I was able to play through Police Quest 4 almost completely without a walkthrough. And the second reason is I just adore the graphics. I mean, it's so 90s FMV style, really brings you back to that era. There are so many actual locations in the game which really are almost like a small time capsule, and you can talk to the characters, see the fashion, see what it was like in the 90s. And not just by pop culture reference, but because the game is more down to earth, it's actually closer to the real thing than many games that try to emulate that decade. And we have another Sierra game entry, and of course I had to mention Space Quest. I really love the series, even though I have to admit it hasn't aged that well, gameplay wise at least, but Roger Waco is such a cool character and the universe is really great, so I still have a very soft spot for the series. I picked the fifth game because, yeah, it's in my opinion just the best game, and it still looks very cool. It has, I would say, decent puzzles. I recently did a full playthrough here on my channel if you want to check that out, and yeah, it didn't age as well as I hoped, because back then I really loved the game. It was one of my favorite adventure games, but as time goes on, you appreciate other things a bit more. You really start to struggle with some of the harder puzzles and some of the stuff that's kind of annoying in this game. The action sequences, all the ways to die, that's not my cup of tea anymore. But yeah, it looks great, it sounds great, it has a lot of great humor, and I would still recommend playing it, even though you should probably use a walkthrough to minimize frustrations. I hope you're enjoying the nostalgia trip so far, and if you do so, I would really appreciate you subscribing to the channel for more retro gaming videos in the future.
I bet. Just a minute. It lives, I see.
Gabriel Knight is another game I just discovered about 2 years ago. I mean, I always knew it was there, but I had never played it. And I actually really did miss out. It has this great mystical story about voodoo and a prophecy, and it takes place in New Orleans, a place that always kind of intrigued me, even though I unfortunately never visited so far. Yeah, the game itself is, well, yeah, typical but high quality point and click adventure. The main character is not really likable, he's really cringy with women around, but yeah, that's kind of the fun and the charm as well, especially how the women respond to him is very cool. And you really want to know what's going on, it's really a captivating story. The puzzles are mostly okay, some are a bit on the moon logic side, but yeah, it's alright. At least if you have a walkthrough. The graphics are really cool, I really like them, they're very atmospheric, and the music is also amazing. I was not a big fan of the finale, but it was alright, definitely not as bad as in Flight of the Amazon Queen. There were also 2 sequels, the first one kind of an FMV game that I'm still curious to check out, even though it looks very different, and the third one is a 3D game, and yeah, I'm not really intrigued by that.
Sorry for the wait, Mr. Flores. I am ready to take you now.
Take me? Take me where?
Now, there's no need to be nervous.
And we got our very first LucasArts entry in the list, it's Grim Fandango. It's a really cool game, and in contrary to many of the other games we've talked so far, it's actually really great to play, has cool puzzles and stuff, so from the gameplay perspective everything's fine, but it doesn't look that great in my opinion. The 3D graphics haven't aged that well, and even the remaster doesn't change a lot about that. I guess that's also the reason why I wasn't such a big fan back in the day, even though the setting is really cool. But another thing that's really standing a bit in the way of the game were the controls. Here, as you see in the remaster, you can control the character with a mouse, which is kind of convenient, but in the original you had to control him with a keyboard with 10 controls, and that was really annoying. Also, the inventory is quite tedious. Yeah, but overall it's a great, very unique game. It's funny and it has a lot of charm and a great world to experience. Loom is such a magical game. I know when I first played it that I was completely immersed in this very strange but beautiful world. The mixture of fairy tale and fantasy was very unique. And it was also my first CD-ROM game, so what you're hearing here is the original music, but the CD version had audio tracks, and it was really great back then because, well, for the time being I was stuck with an Adlib card that didn't play such great songs, and having CD audio with actual orchestral soundtrack was really cool to me. The gameplay is also quite unique for such a game. You don't control your character with verbs but with music notes, and you really have to think outside the box a bit because you only have a vague understanding of what these little melodies do, and sometimes you play them backwards to undo what you were doing in another spot, so there are some very creative combinations and puzzles in the game. I always hope for a sequel to explore the world even further, but well, I guess it's not very likely that that's going to happen, and maybe it's for the better because Loom has a very unique charm that could be destroyed by a modern art style. Now Now this game might be new to you because it has only been released in Germany. If you've watched my Werbespiel video, then you might have heard about it already. It was an advertisement game for the beefy sausages and a really great one. A full-fledged point-and-click adventure where you explore a Hollywood studio with all the different sets and characters, and there are a lot of spoofs of Hollywood movies and cliches, and it's quite funny but also boasts quite a lot of decent puzzles. So even though it might not have the same production value as some of the very big games, I would still recommend playing it if you understand German, this is. Otherwise, well, I'm sorry to tell you that you missed out, but who knows, maybe someday someone will do a fan translation of the game, even though I doubt it. And did I mention the game was free? So obviously it earned bonus points with my younger self.
Whenever I smell asphalt, I think of Marine. That's the last sensation I had before I blacked out. The thick smell of asphalt. And the first thing I saw when I woke up was her face.
Another great game by LucasArts, though not uncontroversial. It was one of the first games that used more 3D and cartoon-like graphics than the old pixel-style art, and the game was a lot more gritty than what you were used to by LucasArts. Of course, my younger self thought that bikes were really cool. And what is cooler than bikes? Bikes in the future and hover bikes and all that stuff. Also, the game sports an amazing rock soundtrack, which fit perfectly at the time, as I was into all kinds of rock. As I discovered recently replaying the remaster, the gameplay was a bit hit and miss. There were some puzzles that didn't make much sense, and I really don't like the action sequences too much, but it's not that bad. You can still easily play it, and if you get stuck, you can use a walkthrough. Another game you have most definitely not have heard of is Hilfe for Amajambere. It's another of those ad games that I talked before, just like the beefy game, but this time it's from the Bundesministerium für wirtschaftliche Zusammenarbeit und Entwicklung. And as you might have guessed it, it's a German game, and no, it's not available in English unfortunately, but nevertheless I really liked that game back then, as it has some great atmosphere. It really brings you close to these locations in Africa, and I especially like the chill little town setting that the game takes place, so not so much high stakes, but a lot of very likable characters and a lot of, well, I would even say culture that you can learn with the game. As you can see from the video, the graphics are quite nice. I especially like the big character portraits that give you a good idea of who you're talking to. The hand-painted backgrounds are also very nice, especially if you consider that this game was completely free. And I also like the upbeat soundtrack that's very memorable and catchy. The puzzles are definitely on the easier side. It's more about talking to the different characters and figuring out what they want from you. But that's also the interesting part, because you really learn about all the problems that the people have and what you can do as a development worker to help. Now this game is a bit different than the one before. Larry 6 and the famous Larry series in general, well, what can I say about that you don't already know? Probably not a lot, but I really love those games. I mean, especially the later ones, because in the first ones you could easily die and I was never a big fan of that, but Larry 6 especially stood out for me because, yeah, it has its amazing location in this spa hotel, it has all the beautiful girls, it has the high resolution graphics, which was a first, And it has actually some pretty decent puzzles and good dialogue, so it's really an enjoyable game overall. It's probably not as good as the 7th game in the series, that's even more beloved as far as I know, but I do prefer the pixel art look a bit over the comic look. And maybe it's just nostalgia that I was a bit younger and that the very rough humor was a bit more my thing back then, before game number 7 was released. The humor is just I love greatness. It hits exactly the right spot between total cringe and still funny. So sometimes you don't want to laugh at a joke, but you just can't help it. It's hilarious. So the game rightfully deserves a spot as number 9 in this top 25.
Good day, miss. My name is Larry.
Hey, kiddies! Let's get happy! It's Fluffy Bun time!
Oh, no! What are you doing on at 4 o'clock in the morning anyway?
From one hilarious game to the next, it's Toonstruck. This game really shines with a more black and twisted humor that was very prevalent in the 90s. It features Christopher Lloyd as a digitized actor in an otherwise cartoony world. And what's really fun about that is how much they make of this setting. So they're really driving home that all this cute and funny stuff and adorable Disney-esque characters are really annoying, and he really wants to get rid of it. And well, he's actually kind of sick of this world, but still forced to help them, or well, let's say he has been talked into helping. It's very creative and has a colorful world that you just love to explore because you never know what you will find around the corner. The puzzles are also quite fine, especially in the first 2 parts of the game. Later on you get in the villain's castle, and I feel from there it goes a bit downhill with creativity and the puzzles as general, but that's not a big downside. Otherwise you really have this beautiful graphics and a very funny and alive backgrounds and characters that just have a ton of personality, and you add the very quirky and almost cartoony performance of Christopher Lloyd himself, and you get a really well-made game that has deserved a spot on this list. Now we are entering absolute classic territory. Day of the Tentacle might be on the top 1 spot for many of you watching, and it might have been my number 1 spot as well, if it has not been for me replaying the game, I think 2 years ago and about 6 years ago. Because, as funny as this sounds, the game has not grown on me, but a bit of the opposite. Don't get me wrong, I still love this game to death, but it somehow felt a bit more tedious when I replayed it. I'm not sure what it was, but with switching the characters, doing the stuff, I felt that the puzzles were really on the forefront, and I was not so much immersed in a world and in a story as in other games maybe. So I guess that if you replay a game where you kind of still know the puzzles to a certain extent and you're not so much interested in that part, then it changes your perspective that you have on the game. It's still incredibly funny and very clever, but yeah, as I said, the locations are just not that interesting. You only have that house in the 3 time zones, which is totally fine for the game, but it makes me less want to replay it for that reason. Okay, what else can I say? I mean, just look at the graphics, they are awesome. It has this very unique style that you don't see in any other game. And I think that's actually a great thing. I think it wouldn't have worked if others tried to replicate the style too much. So that's really amazing. And yeah, the music is great. As I said, the writing is great. The voiceover is great. If you have not played it once, you definitely should. If you have played it already several times, then maybe you understand why I'm not putting it higher on my list here. Is that a fair assessment? Well, leave your comment in the comments. I'm not 100% sure myself, but that's how I see it. And as a side note, I have to mention the amazing fan sequel to the game, Return of the Tentacle. It's very short, it's more just a demo, but it's great. It really has the same production values and the same character, and it's free, so you should definitely check that out. So, if you still not quit this video in outrage, then I might ask you for subscribing to the channel, and you're going to get nice new retro videos in the future. And if you hit the notification bell as well, you will be notified if there are any new ones out.
This better not take too long. I've got an anatomy final tomorrow.
Freunde? Wir waren nur dreimal zusammen weg und schon erzählst du mir, wir sollen nur Freunde sein?
Sorry for the German opening, but I just love that voice acting. That's actually a thing about the LucasArts game. They always had great translation as well in German, so that's a plus point. But now let's talk about the game Sam & Max. Based on a cartoon that I had never heard of, this is probably the funniest game on the list to me. Not so much laughing out loud funny, but just this twisted dark undertone and the bizarre but very creative characters, twists and dialogue, and the story doesn't really make any sense, but that's not really important because you just want to see where the ride goes. Yeah, it's almost kind of a road trip. You go from location to location through the USA, you find all these weird places, you do all this weird stuff, but it follows its own logic, so the puzzles are mostly very well designed, and I would say the game is actually on the easier side. But nonetheless, it's really rewarding to solve them, and it's so much fun just to go around with those two very politically incorrect characters and try to save the day by destroying everything and putting everyone in danger. The art is also amazing. It's very creative, it has its own distinct look, memorable locations, and I just love the soundtrack. It's very groovy, very jazzy, and it just fits great with this pseudo-detective theme that the game has. Yeah, I just love it. I can also recommend highly the Telltale Sam & Max games, but there are a few hit and misses depending on which episode you play. There are a few of the greatest Sam & Max experience you can get, but also some of the lesser ones, but Hit the Road is really a very even experience from start to finish. Put down the pitchforks, I know, Eco Quest above King's Quest, Police Quest, Space Quest, but hear me out why I just love this game. The majority of the game takes place underwater, and I was a huge fan of underwater areas, aquariums, fish and so on in my youth, so this is already a big plus in my book, and how wonderful those underwater worlds looked. It just spiked my imagination like no other game, and I always wished that there was this magical kingdom underwater where you can just breathe and explore. And even if some people might be put off by the saving the planet vibes of the game, I really liked that back then, and I think it's still a very valid message, and I didn't mind picking up trash because you had this visual progression that you really made a difference and made the environment more beautiful. Yes, the game is more tailored towards children, but it's really a nice adventure in the truest meaning of the word. You actually go on an adventure, you explore, you learn, you overcome obstacles, and you meet friends along the way. If I had kids, this would probably be the first game I would want to play with them, but I don't, so I just play it again on my own. Oh, and you're welcome for the earworm. That theme is not going to leave your head probably for the next few weeks. There had also been a sequel in the Rainforest, which had better production values and is also a very nice game. The setting didn't vibe as much with me, but it's still a great game and one that I actually want to replay very soon. Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, the best Indiana Jones movie that never was. But it's easy to imagine that this could have been a movie because the story is really great, the characters, the pacing, the set pieces, everything here is top notch. It looks beautiful, it has the iconic Indiana Jones soundtrack, and also if you're playing the talkie version you get really good voiceovers. And especially interesting to me was that there are different ways to play the game. You got 3 different parts that you can choose one from, and the game plays really differently. More action orientated or more puzzle orientated, or you got the team mode where it's more about the 2 characters that you play, Indy and Sophia, which both have their own puzzles and abilities that will help you progress through the story. The puzzles can be a bit tricky, especially in the puzzle mode, but they always make sense and never get too frustrating. It has this great adventure vibe like the movies and a very good sense of humor that's a bit tongue-in-cheek when you're fighting the evil Nazi guys that again want to rule the world with some supernatural artifacts. So why didn't I put this even higher on the list? It's mostly because of the ending at Atlantis itself. I didn't really enjoy that part too much because, navigation is a bit complicated and the puzzles seem to be a bit more tedious than in the rest of the game, and you really spend a long time in the same location. It's fine, it's okay, but in my opinion it could be even better. I still would love to see an actual sequel of this game, but we will get a third-person action Indiana Jones games, I think from the makers of Wolfenstein, so I'm curious how that will turn out. Now we're getting into territory where it's really hard for me to criticize the game. I think I just love everything about Broken Sword. And the second game was also awesome, which made it really hard to even decide which of the 2 games I should put here. I went with the first one because I got a bit more memories about that, and I think that the locations are a bit more memorable, and it's just the classic story of Broken Sword with the clown and the explosion in the cafe. It's just a bit more iconic. The production value for these games really go through the roof. There are so many animations, so many little details. It's really the best pixel art, almost interactive movie you can play in my opinion. And it also tells a great story with a lot of mysteries and maybe a few cliches on the way. But this has been before the Dan Brown books, so it felt really fresh and interesting to have such a conspiracy theory and all the interesting historical connections. And taking place all over Europe and especially in France, it's a bit like a virtual sightseeing trip as well. Having played the English dubbed version for the first time while recording this video, I felt that maybe that could be the reason why it hasn't been more famous in the US, because I feel that the voices in the German version are actually quite a lot better. Especially Nico, who was voiced by Franziska Prigilla, the German voice for Gillian Anderson, which really gave Nico a lot of character with this calm, low, sexy sounding voice that really made the character come to life. But maybe I'm just used to that voice and it's just irritating if you switch and it conflicts with the memories you have.
As I picked up the plastic ball, I realized it was intended to be worn.
Another surprise? Monkey Island not on the top spot? Yes, I mean, at this point the games are so close together that it's almost a coin toss, but I feel that the number one spot is still a bit more important to me. Yeah, what can I say about Monkey Island? First of all, it's not just a game, it's a series of games, and it was really hard for me to even decide which game to put here. I just recently replayed the first 3 games in anticipation of the new Monkey Island game, and that actually makes things even more complicated, because in my head I thought, well, Monkey Island 1 is a bit of an old game, and Monkey Island 2 is mostly regarded as the big centerpiece of the trilogy. But now I've ended up with Curse of Monkey Island, the 3rd game, and The Secret of Monkey Island would actually be my 2nd pick. I think the reason for that is that LeChuck's Revenge is probably the most serious of the 3 games. Not that it's really serious, but it's a bit darker, it's a bit more menacing, and well, Guybrush wears a beard, so he's gotten old, and I think I personally just prefer my Monkey Island games a bit more lighthearted. I remember when Curse was released that I was a bit hesitant about the new art style. Now I just love it and appreciate every detail. To me it feels like the quintessence adventure game. It has everything you want in there, and it's just what most people think about when they hear the term point and click adventure. If there would be any actual downsides to Curse of Monkey Island, I have to say it would be the ending. That's just a bit short, feels a bit rushed, but that's really just nitpicking here. Simon the Sorcerer is nothing like a hidden gem or anything like that, but I feel that especially the second part is still quite underrated. At the time, reviewers were a bit skeptical that it took too much inspiration from Monkey Island, but I feel that the game can really stand on its own 2 feet. The fantasy fairy tale world is really very imaginative, and the humor is definitely not the same as in Monkey Island. It's a bit more lowbrow, you could say, and yes, there are some jokes that have aged like milk, but still there are so many creative ideas in there that I recommend everyone who's interested in point and click adventures to play it. The puzzles are actually quite witty, and the graphics has its very own unique style. All the characters look very 3-dimensional because they shift their poses quite often, and they look all strange and a bit hideous, but also very cool and unique. Music and voiceover is top notch, and the world offers many memorable locations that have burned into my mind. I guess one of the reasons why not more people have played this is that it's a sequel and the first game is not that great. It's still completely playable, but it's a bit all over the place, especially with the puzzle design in my opinion. So I definitely recommend playing the second game, and you don't really need to know much about the first game to enjoy this one. The company behind the game AdventureSoft is still around, and you can actually order the game as a full box version for only £9 on their homepage. So that has been my very subjective top 25 point and click adventure from the 90s list. That's a mouthful. And now I wanted to finish the video with a few honorable mentions of adventure games that are not from the 90s, but I still wanted to mention. First, I just quickly wanted to tell you about my own adventure game that I made. Curse of the Old God is available completely for free on Steam. It's sitting at mostly positive reviews, and it's a detective game with a Lovecraftian story. So if you're into that kind of stuff, go check it out. I would love to hear if you enjoy it. Thimbleweed Park. Great game, great story, great graphics, and very funny with this bizarre Twin Peaks vibe. I guess you've already played this, and if you haven't, you should definitely give it a try.
My name is Susan Ashworth. I live alone in this old 2-bedroom flat. I rarely go outside. Some would say it's a lonely life, and I guess that's true, but I don't like people's company. Not lately, anyway.
And last but not least, I wanted to add the Cat Lady. It's an amazing game that really touched me. It's a bit creepy, mysterious, and yeah, really sad, but it's a game that really makes you think. And I don't mean the puzzle so much as the message of the game. If you haven't checked it out yet, I think Halloween would be the perfect timing, and I don't think you will regret it. That's it. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon. See ya!